Right.
The Hoover Board of Education meeting is now called to order. If you choose, please join me in a moment of silent prayer. Thank you.
Please stand for our pledge. Salute, pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Firstly, thank you everyone for being here today. I know it's been rainy and cold, so I hope you take care of yourself so you won't be sick at work. And wrap those kids up too as well. The board, you have before you the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? So moved. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Agenda has been approved. Now we have our recognition time. Assistant Superintendent Ron Dotson will present our first recognition piece.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. We have two employees at this time that I would like to recognize. It's Brian Phillips and Kelly Lane. Step forward, please. Brian Phillips is our Chief Technology Officer. Kelly Lane is our District Instructional Technology Specialist. And both of these individuals are members of the Alabama Educational Technology Association and were recent recipients of state-level awards. Mr. Phillips was awarded the Making It, capital I, capital T, happen. And this is an award that recognizes an individual who, through their leadership, carries forth the vision of instructional technology and empowering children to learn at ever and ever higher levels. And Brian has certainly done that here in Hoover, not just building the roads, but picking the cars to go on the road and setting up the speed limit signs and everything else, eliminating the traffic bottlenecks and everything else to make what happens an everyday occurrence. One of the things I love about Brian is he likes to talk about technology becoming air. We don't think about the air we breathe. And so we're working, striving to get to that point where this is just a part of, you expect a desk and a chair to sit in, and you expect your technology to work. And that's still a work in progress, but my goodness, how far we've come. And you have made it happen, Brian Phillips. So thank you so very much. Kelly Lane was recognized by the association, and she's only the second individual to be recognized as so, for the Emerging Leader Award. And the criteria for this award said, this is an individual who motivates and instigates transformation. And that says it all. Kelly Lane is an instigator and a motivator. Thank you, Kelly, for coming to Hoover City Schools. You've made a difference here, and we're getting there with your help and assistance. Thank you. Melinda Bonner.
Good evening. Tonight I would like to bring to your recognition some national awards received by our schools for creating a healthy school environment. And these awards were presented by the Alliance for a Healthier Generation. And this is an evidence-based initiative through the Alliance to help us create and sustain these healthy environments where students can learn better and to flourish. It's a collaborative effort through PE, physical education, health education, and nutrition. The Alliance was founded by the American Heart Association and the Clinton Foundation, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has supported the Alliance with over $51 million to support its initiative for Healthy Schools program. The Healthy Schools program also uses a health index by the CDC and helps our schools to assess their progress in the program. And those areas are identified as best practices. So the National Healthy Schools Award is a very prestigious achievement. Schools that receive this award have met those best practice criteria as established by the Alliance Healthy Schools program. To complete and submit the application for the National Healthy Schools Award, it requires a collaborative approach between the school site, Alliance representative, and child nutrition. Our district wellness coordinator, Tricia Nira, helped align the school wellness initiatives along with each school site representative. On October the 2nd, Tricia and 7 other Hoover City School educators were able to attend the 2015 Alliance Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. It was an all-expense-paid trip to receive their National Healthy Schools Award. Awards are granted at 3 different levels: bronze, silver, and gold. 376 schools from 31 states were recognized this year over the nation. 11 schools were from Alabama. 8 of those 11 schools from Alabama were from Hoover City Schools. So I would like for the school site representatives to come forward. The following schools received the Bronze Award. Deer Valley, Courtney Emerson. Is she here tonight? Okay. I'll have Tricia Nira stand up. She is our wellness coordinator, and she can represent Deer Valley tonight. Green Valley, Dana Depew, school site representative, assistant principal. Greystone Elementary, Rand Payton, PE teacher. Gwynn Elementary, Erica Farnhan. Simmons Middle, Jeff Ray. South Shades Crest, Sharita Williams, assistant principal, was our school site representative. And Trace Crossings, Melinda Culberson. Also, only 10 schools in the nation received the Gold Distinction Award, and included in that benchmark of those 10 is Bluff Park Elementary under the school site representative Beth Ullman. And we have Crystal Littlejohn standing in for her. And these recognitions tell us all that we are achieving and working toward a healthy school environment in Hoover City Schools. Thank you.
Thank you everyone so much for the hard work they do for our students and our school, and thank you for recognizing. At this time, we will have our superintendent report led by Dr. Kathy Murphy.
Yes, thank you so much. Board members, I just want to report to you that we have had the opportunity to have 5 community meetings to have conversations about our rezoning. Those have been very productive meetings. We've learned a lot from our constituents and from our public. They've not only shared ideas during the time that we were with them in the community meetings, but they've continued to share with us on our website by way of text and email, and we're grateful and appreciative for that. I have shared some pieces of information with you this evening. I have provided you a longitudinal view. It is the in the red document that gives you the longitudinal view 2007 through 2015 of our enrollment. You see the difference that impact has had for those years to the far right column. And should you want to bring that in closer and look at the last 2 years or 3 years or whatever way you might want to take a look at that, you can see how our enrollment has increased and or decreased. So I think that is a valuable document for you. We've also provided you the update on our October 2012 enrollment analysis. The reason this particular document will be important for you as we look at not just what's happening this year, but as we look at seventh graders as they move to eighth grade, and eighth grade, as students roll, you can begin to get some idea if there's a particularly large class that may be getting ready to graduate. What does the ninth grade class look like that's coming in to replace the seniors who may be rolling out? And we'll be glad to continue to play with this data and prepare it in such a way that you can see over the next year or two what that looks like as our students move grade level to grade level. Gives us information in case there's an outlier situation where you have a particularly large group that might graduate and leave a void, or a particularly large group that may be coming in. So that kind of data is valuable to us as we continue to study. We've also provided you a third piece of paper this evening, which talks about our school capacity, and it actually provides you some information, and we've gotten feedback from some of our constituents who said, take a look at this with us again, which is what we've done. We gave you method A, which this is the method that we've shared with our public when we went out to our public meetings. And then we've shared a method B and a method C. So again, I want to say I'm grateful for the feedback that we've gotten. It allows us to look at our capacity information. But one of the things that we all have to understand is regardless of what method we use, we're doing so with certain assumptions in hand. And so, for example, if you look at method A, which is the method that we've shared with our public, this is the method that we have used formally, previously, sort of historically, to give us analysis of our elementary capacity. It takes into account our teacher prep time. The downside to the method A, if you would be that it doesn't take into account art, music, and PE classes. So that's the negative, if you will, of that. Method B gives you an opportunity to look at what we've kind of called a homeroom view, where we're assuming that every classroom has students that are occupying the rooms at that time. This does not take into account, however, planning periods for teachers. So that's a piece you need to understand. And then we've looked at a method C. Method C allows us to take a look at students who are in art and music and physical education, but it almost is a double counting system, because it gives the thought that a child is sitting in Miss Smith's room but is at PE at the same time. So I share this with you to say that this, I'm grateful for the information that's come to our attention. I'm grateful for the thought of continuing to look at capacity. We know definitely that we're at capacity in a number of our locations, and we still know that we have some of our schools that are not at capacity. So just want you to know that this is something that we're continuing to look at. I think it's important to share with you, as you look across the very top of the sheet that has methods A, B, and C, that we've reached out today to all of our principals and said, look at these with us. We sent this out. Look at this. Talk to us. Give us feedback. And we called every principal today. We've spent our entire day looking at this analysis and said, you know, talk to us about the three methods. And in the course of that conversation, we've said to each of our principals, think about your school and the classrooms that you have in your school that are not currently being used. What kind of capacity do you have in your building? And so Bluff Park has one classroom that could be utilized. Deer Valley has 2 classrooms. Greystone has 9 classrooms. Green Valley has 5 classrooms. Gwen has 6 classrooms. River Chase has 3 classrooms. Rocky Ridge is out of room, and as you may know, they have actually used a little bit of their lobby space and repurposed it for students. Shades Mountain has 3 rooms. South Shades Crest has 5, and Trace Crossings has 12. And again, we thought this was valuable information for us to have. If you'll add 12 beside the Trace Crossings, I'm sorry that didn't drop down. So if you'll add 12. So again, as you look at this, you see a situation where we have some schools who are saying, I have the flexibility of a room. Another school talking about having the flexibility of up to 12 rooms. I'm sorry, that 12 didn't drop down under Trace Crossings. So again, board members, I think the purpose in sharing this with you is to say, A, we've completed 5 community meetings, lots of good feedback, we're continuing to study and review, and spent a great deal of time today talking about capacity, and did so at the invitation and the information that was shared from us, or to us, from our community.
Well, you know, before any board members have any questions, I do want to make a statement. Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Murphy, for all the hard work you put into this and making every single process we've had at Hoover a very transparent process and inclusive. We knew going into this process was going to have some challenges to it, but you know, with any project or process, you're going to you need the more information you have, the better the end result will be. So thank you for the 5 meetings, setting up a website, getting information back, responding back to it, being with teachers and principals, DOJ, and a lot of other things you're going to have to do. But this first part of the process, I'm really pleased with what's taking place. I was able to go to 3 of the meetings, was not able to last 2 to travel, but they were very responsive. Even students in high school responded and gave their feedback, so that's always great because they're in the classrooms and they're in the schools. So just thank you so much. Thank for our community too as well.
And let me say how grateful I am because principals are engaging with us and talking to us. They made themselves available on kind of short notice today when we said, look at this with us. My staff, who's very engaged in supporting this process. We will have a meeting with the Department of Justice on December, I believe that's confirmed for the 10th and or 11th. And so we're looking forward to getting the Department of Justice back to the table with us. They know that we are working vigorously, and as we've said in some of our community meetings, Mr. Sweeney, you know, certainly we want to have as much of our work prepared and done when the Department of Justice gets here, and also for that opportunity to put some information in front of Judge Hackala.
So there are 2 aspects that I think you and your staff have covered so well. One, the data that we presented concerning the school attendance and racial backgrounds and so forth, but also spending a lot of time with the Department of Justice explaining community involvement, community interest, community tradition, so that they wouldn't be looking at just cold numbers, but they would be looking at the sensitivity of community to what's gone on in the past. So we think they're taking that into consideration.
Very good. We look forward to having them on the 10th and the 11th of December.
Any additional questions or comments from the board?
Do these numbers of available classrooms, do they account for self-contained units?
Yes, we've included all of our classrooms to include any gifted classrooms, self-contained classrooms. Dr. Dotson's worked with us on that.
Not special education self-contained. Those are typically specialized rooms that are built just for that function, built-in restroom facilities and things like that. So those were not counted as classrooms, but any classroom, any space that could be used as a classroom was counted, whether it was a classroom or not. If that makes sense. It could be made into a classroom.
Any consideration about lunchroom capacities and I mean, you know, it's always a challenge when kids get in there and the earlier they start or later they finish on lunch.
Not in this analysis, but that is, you're right, that's usually the Achilles heel, is how many kids you can feed.
And we have some of our children who do begin lunch, and Melinda's in the room, as early as 10:45 in the morning, I believe, is our earliest lunch, and in part, that is because of a larger population and needing to get them into the cafeteria, get everyone fed.
Any additional questions from the board? All right, if there are no further questions, next on our agenda is public participation. I would ask everyone that comes to the mic, just state your name and address.
Good evening, I'm Joshua Bryant, live at 3714 Carisbrook Drive in Bluff Park. Thank you for taking the time for us to speak tonight, and especially the time that you dedicated to hearing the community and the 5 groups as you've done prior to this process, as opposed to what a lot of us experienced a year ago, and taking that into consideration. We greatly appreciate that. We'd also like to mention within this that the data work that you've done today. I'm part of a group that worked with that earlier today. Stephen Hertz, who has done an excellent job of looking at these spreadsheets, and something that I do every day anyway. Unfortunately, I had to do it on my free time as well today. But we appreciate the look into the data. So some of the questions that just we would pose, you're going through 3 different methodologies, and I think that's extremely important. We're talking about something that has this sort of scope that we're dealing with of a school system this size. So some of the things that I would ask about the methodologies in general would be the 3 methods that we are now looking at as opposed to the single method we were going through before. Are any of those using the Department of Education methodology for how they count classrooms?
Yes, and we have reached out. Were you able to reach the State Department today? I know, Ron, you brought that point up about how the State Department, is there anyone at the State Department that might be able to provide some additional resources to us?
I can find it, please.
Okay. And we will reach out to the State Department and have them talk with us and walk with us through this process, and certainly we want to align our process with the State Department.
Great, I appreciate that. And we would actually, I think of us who were expect to be held to a higher standard than what the Department of Education holds to as well. So
Yeah.
I like to throw that in there also. We appreciate the engagement and the collaboration, again, especially. 2 very key words that we asked for last year, and we feel we're getting that this year. We know that what is going to occur, what needs to occur, is for the betterment of the school system. We appreciate that, and I don't think that there's maybe a feeling that those of us in the department don't want that, and it's not the case. I think we are all as Hoover can be, Hoover before it was Hoover, if you will. So we're just very, very engaged. And, we want to make sure it's a partnership, and you're doing that for us. We appreciate it. One last question, along with the DOJ. We have the notes and how the classrooms are calculated, and again, through these 3 methods, ultimately, what really matters is the starting point, the maximum amount of classroom space. That's the root to the formula for all of these classroom calculations. And according to Hoover's, how we originally were calculating the data, that was a carryover from last year, and we totally understand that. We were excluding a number of things from that. So not only were we excluding science labs, art rooms, and music, all right, so what would be considered our specials. And rightly so. Those are classrooms that are full, and they do not need to be included. On top of that, any special education rooms that were dedicated to special education were also excluded from that root number. The issue that we found was we were applying, along with that formula, an adjustment on top of that. So we were adjusting an adjusted number. So double counting, if you will, and I think you'd even mentioned that earlier. So we were taking a root classroom number, adjusting that for all of the specials that are required that we want to provide here at Hoover, but then applying another 17% adjustment on top of that, which is actually leading to a buffer in that number. So it changes the definition of the word maximum. So is it no longer the maximum capacity, or is that our upper threshold for operating capacity? It's just that we need to make sure that that's clear. And I'd like to see the different methods, because I think that's where you're going with those. So we want to make sure that the root number that we're using, because that's the key, what is truly the maximum capacity of each school, is the maximum capacity where one more student in the school and all the windows fall out? Or is the maximum sort of, hey, this is kind of our target max, and then we adjust that 90% down for our optimal. But for schools that are in low growth zones, such as most of, not just Bluff Park, but the core of Hoover, Green Valley, Glen, a number of those that have very low growth numbers, that's very important to them. Whereas schools that have high growth numbers in the future, you definitely want them to be at a much lower operational percentage, because they have to be able to take in that growth. So I'm interested in seeing those pull apart numbers. So thank you for that. Will these be provided on the website anytime soon?
Yes, we'll continue to work through these, and we'll be very transparent. We'll post up, and thank you all again for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you for your time.
John,
Thank you.
quick.
Yes, sir.
I know you look at the structural piece of it, that is related to facilities, available classrooms, and how children may be reassigned or realigned or not. But operating behind that analysis is still this thing that we're all faced with relating to budgets. So when you look at all this, regardless of classroom space and the realignment, reassignments, you've still got classroom size consideration, which is driven by the budget, which is driven by the numbers of teachers and the number of different course offerings that may, mission classrooms that may or may not be counted in the art and music and all that, the overall total offering. So behind all of this still lurks that budget cloud and the need for managing costs or finding additional revenue streams.
Yeah, absolutely, and we understand that. Again, what I'm specifically addressing is the data and that root number that all others are being calculated from going forward. We understand there's going to be other methodologies allied to it. Okay, we have a budget we have to meet with a certain school, or maybe a certain school needs 2 additional classrooms for another use. They don't have their math coach in a smaller office, which is normally excluded. Maybe they're sitting in a full classroom.
But I want you to
We understand that.
I understand, okay. Just as long as you understand that the actual physical aspect of classroom availability and assignment of children is, there is a physical aspect of it, but there's also a budget aspect that has to be optimized around a whole host of other things.
We do, thank you. We just want to make it clear on our root number.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any more public participation? If there's no further public participation, we have our minutes from our regular board meeting October 6th and also October 16th. Do I have a motion to approve minutes?
So,
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor say aye. All opposed? Minutes have been passed. Next on our agenda is personnel report. Do I have a motion to approve personnel report? So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions from the board? No questions from the board. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Personnel report actions have been approved. Next on our agenda, business actions that include monthly financial, payroll, and cash. Do I have a motion to approve business actions? So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions from the board?
Yes, sir. Ms. Ante, on your recap, you mentioned that the variance of excess expenditures over revenues is favorable by $6.5 million. That's a pretty good sized number. I see that $1.2 million is deferred from bus purchases. Help me understand our $1.6 million less than anticipated payroll, and our year-end accrual salary of being $2.5 million less. How is that?
We had several items that, as you stated, our budgeted excess of expenditures over revenues for across all funds was budgeted to be a negative $9.8 million for this fiscal year. Our actual number is a negative $1,395,000, which is a significant variance over our budgeted amount, and primarily came from areas that were outside of the budget consideration at the time that the budget was formed. The bulk of the differences come around in deferral of capital projects. We receive funds through the state, through public school funds. We're required to budget for those funds, whether our intent is to actually do that construction in that current year or to move it forward and combine it with additional funds in a future period. So that, of course, accounted for $1.4 million of that variance. We also had a variance related to our timing of purchase of school buses. We have had fleet renewal fund for 2 years now that has built up to $1.2 million that we have deferred, and we'll actually buy some buses later this month out of those funds. So a lot of it is combining funds to make the most efficient and useful sense of those monies, and sometimes a larger pool of money leads to a better project and a better offering to our students. I will leave the other two parts of your question to the last. We had a few sources of revenue that were not budgeted. One of those was the money from BP that we received from the city a few weeks ago. That was within that fiscal period, but outside the realm of being able to do a budget amendment for that. We also got a bit more from our E-rate program, which is a reimbursement program through the federal government to help us pay for some technology that comes into our schools. Don't get too familiar with that word because E-rate is slowly going away from us, and it will not be something that's available to us. In fact, We had already begun to budget receiving less funds of those, but we were quite pleased that the number came in more than what we had anticipated in our budget. We also spent slightly less than what we had budgeted in our technology expenditures. Our utilities were down slightly over the prior year, but I think in part that might have been because I maybe overestimated a bit what I thought the utilities would be, probably because if you remember, the 14 year was when we had Snowmageddon and we were using all-out utilities for all day long for days and days on end, and I think that might have caused a bit overstatement perhaps in our estimating standpoint. The other two major components of the variance relate to salary-related items, one of which is our salary accrual. And our salary accrual, now this is where I'm getting real technical, but you're going to get more technical information on accounting later than just me. We accrue for salaries based on, and it doesn't have to do with teachers are on a 188-day year, it's based on how many days of that year do they work in our current fiscal year. So since our fiscal year starts on October 1 and our school year starts somewhere in August, you're going to see some variances around that, and we have to accrue for those amounts. We happened to move school back almost a week this year, so that meant we had fewer days this year that I had to include in the budget than I did in the prior budget. That created a swing of $2.5 million. I would not necessarily have known that because the calendar was not finished when we did the budget, and really all we could do was guess, and typically being of a conservative nature, I guessed that it's going to cost me money instead of saving me money, so then I budgeted more down in salary expense to cover a negative or an increase in the salary accrual. So you really had swings that happened both ways to account for the variance. So everything is there, all of our expenditures are there, and all of our revenues are there, and hopefully, in fact, this was the first year I think I've overestimated a little tiny bit on how much ad valorem we're going to get in. We're just slightly under budget on ad valorem this year, which is a little bit unusual. If we look just briefly at how we compare to the 2014 year, we were improved over the 2014 year by $6.2 million. We spent the expenditures exceeded the revenue $7.9 million in 14. And again, it was $1,395,000 in 15. Much of that is accounted for some capital expenditures being much higher in 14 by about $3.1 million than in 15. Again, we have to get into that payroll accrual because that's the year we moved up, so we accrued more. So that kind of comes back to us. We also spent more in technology in that year. We had a difference in technology as well as what was spent in that year, along with some other adds in some staffing and instructional items. So those were the primary things that happened in expenditures. Difference in revenue over 14. In 14 is when we received the $1.6 million, which is the tail end of the Jefferson County 1% money. We, of course, did not receive an equivalent of that in 15, but we did receive some offsetting dollars in 15. Such as the BP money and our ad valorem. While it was less than budget, it was more than last year. So you see there's a small narrow window there on how that accounts for. But we were within $300,000 of our total revenue between 14 and 15, which is really very, very close when you begin to look at the numbers. So that is where we came out for our fiscal year 15. So I think we're very pleased with these results, knowing that we still will next year most likely see the expenditure of some are part of those capital funds, and we'll see the expenditure of some or most of all of the part of the purchases for the buses.
So all being said, the anticipated deficit for the 2015-2016 school year, or really the fiscal year, where is that? Is there a change appreciably from the budget hearing?
Well, it's difficult to tell right now. One is we'll track the ad valorem receipts and see how that falls. We'll also look, we're starting to hear rumors of probation could possibly come back in sometime soon. I heard that just the other day. That would, of course, take quite a change for us. We haven't had that in a while. It's very difficult when you don't know a lot of the pieces when you're doing the budget, and so we tend to budget very conservatively, which is being conservative on our revenues and err on the high side on really primarily our payroll expenditures in the event that there's something that happens out there that either because of the accrual or some unforeseen need in staffing arises. The more we began to narrow those things down, and with the slowing enrollment of our students, we should be less impacted by those type of changes going forward.
Would it help you to do school calendars in 2-year blocks to account for the accruals?
Well, I could estimate the accruals much better, yes.
And let me tell you that we're working on that. As a matter of fact, we thought we'd have a 2-year plan, a calendar to bring to you this evening, but needed just a little more tweaking. So next month, you should have the proposal for the next academic year ready for you. Also with a calendar for 17-18.
Can I ask you a question on the capital side and the bus side one more time, just to make sure I'm clear? We had 1.4 million set aside for capital projects.
Mhm.
Was that just a placeholder and we've decided not to do those, or how
No,
do we?
it was more, with public school funds, if we receive the funds from the state, we have to budget an expenditure for them. Most of those are projects that do need to have to take place. Most of them dealt with roofing and paving of parking lots. We just have not done those yet this year, and we'll look at moving them into the next fiscal year. Part of it was those were biddable projects, and we were trying to keep our biddable projects to a minimum until we had our permanent placement of superintendent, rather than doing that under an interim superintendent.
So those monies that were received for this calendar year, this fiscal year, I'm sorry, can be rolled over to be used next year?
Yes, but they won't, the revenue will remain in 15, the expenditure will just happen in 16.
Okay, and on the bus purchases, we had $1.2 million, and we have not purchased those because of fleet renewal. How does that work?
We have ordered, fleet removal can move year to year, and you can combine years. We placed a bid for buses. They have now become available, they're ready, and we should be picking them up and paying for them very soon.
Okay,
So that's for half of that, that's
so
about
then
$600,000.
$600,000 of this 1.2
Yes.
will show up next month.
Most likely.
As
Mhm.
an expense.
Yeah, sometimes, I don't know when the bill's gonna come in. They keep getting information from me to make sure they have the right numbers on them and tags and stuff like that, so. Should be soon, and then we will look at what to do about spending the rest of the funds, and then we want to order any fleet buses out of that fleet renewal. But that money remains available for us. It does carry over, and it is, available just for buses.
Thank you.
Anything else?
One quick question. You talked about Avalon receipts.
Mm-hmm.
Do we receive majority of our money in the month of January, February?
January, February,
Okay,
March.
so you can get a better idea.
We get a good picture. We actually came in a little bit stronger. Where you start to see some growth on the tail end is car buying and car tags. That we seem to see a little pickup in that around in the summer, which is not very. There's not a consistent pattern to what happens with that. It came in a little stronger than I had. First, I had been a little bit more gloom and doom about where I thought our alarm was going to come, but it came back a little better than I thought. So that's much more economically driven in how the economy's faring, and you see it much faster than you do with housing values.
If I'm not mistaken, the legislature changed the code this year to say a new car that's bought during the fiscal year or calendar year. In the past, if that car got sold by the end of the year, there was no sales tax collected, so it's going to be collected regardless of when that car is bought and sold.
Yeah,
So that should be an
yeah.
increase.
If that's when it's assessed for ad valorem purposes, when they buy their tags.
Okay.
So that's what we'll have to look for. Yeah, that's what we'll have to watch for. So and they do change the rules up around whether it's in arrears or prepaid around that a lot, and you have advance payment, which has gotten it to be a bit tricky nowadays too on that. So, but we continue to keep an eye on that. Any other questions?
Just for definition, avalorem is defined as?
A property tax.
I mean,
which,
for
yes, it's property tax on real and personal property, so it's property tax on your home and on your automobile, boat, mobile home, any type of motorcycle, anything that has a tag on it, and any building that you can live in has ad valorem tax assessed to it, or building or business would have ad valorem tax.
Sales tax, local?
Local, we receive local sales tax from Shelby County. They share in that, and that number runs, I can't recall off the top of my head, somewhere around, it's over $1 million that we get in Shelby County sales tax proceeds.
Any additional questions?
I do have, do you want to go ahead and vote on that?
Yeah. No more further questions? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Business actions have been approved. I know, Kathy, Angie, you have some additional information you would like to give?
Yes, we are, because this is our year end, There's a significant change that's going to happen to our audited financial statements that I believe I shared some brief information on you that might have just been your substitute for no nos at the end of a long day. But Jason Harp and Andrew Waits with Carriggs and Ingram are here just to give you a brief synopsis of that, to answer any questions. They are certainly the expert of this new Governmental Accounting Standards Board pronouncement that was not even a new one. It's been out there long. It's just now effective to where we have to adopt it. And what our adoption of that will be, we are not a lone wolf in this. It's every school district across the state is having to address the same thing. But I did want you all to have the opportunity to have an expert in front of you to answer any questions, and so that when our audited financial statements are published in March, they won't be a surprise to you.
Thank you.
Jason and Andrew.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, and I just briefly wanted to kind of go over the history of the accrual or the liability that will be appearing on your full accrual balance sheet. You know, governments are kind of an unusual animal when it comes to financial reporting. You have a full accrual balance sheet and a modified accrual balance sheet and income statement. And I think with schools as well as cities, we always focus more on the modified accrual, the fund statements, general fund, capital projects fund. That's kind of where we live. This will really impact the full accrual balance sheet that has more of the long-term assets and liabilities on it. And what this is doing, and you may have all heard about this, and like Kathy said, this is nationwide. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board is now requiring governments to put their unfunded or net pension liability on their balance sheet as a long-term liability. And that's what we'll be doing as of September 30th, 2015. The Retirement System of Alabama has supplied each member with the data they need to record that liability on their books, and we'll be doing that. It'll stay on your books, but it will be reduced over time as employees make their contributions and members make their contributions in to cover that unfunded liability. So that's kind of the basis behind what we'll be doing, and there again, it's a significant change. You know, one question that I've gotten is how will that affect any kind of ratings with bonds, agencies? Generally, since this is all going in at once, that's kind of been, in what I've heard, my opinion, that's been baked in. So this isn't necessarily a huge surprise from a debt standpoint. So hopefully everything with that's been answered, you know, related to any kind of ratings and you know, the debt agencies, besides this new debt that we'll be putting on the books. So anyway, like Kathy said, when we get your 9/30/2015 audited financials, we'll see that number. We'll certainly go over it again, but we just mainly wanted to let you know that that would be happening. It's significant, but it's happening with everybody across the country. And as long as those contributions go in over time, that, you know, in theory, that net pension liability will decrease. So it's not something that anybody's going to have to pay, you know, next year or tomorrow. It's just a long-term liability that's going on. So anyway, certainly would like to answer any questions if you're interested in talking about governmental pension accounting. So
From a fiscal management perspective, it means nothing. It's just an FYI kind of.
yeah, that's right. Because there again, we live in that fund world, and we'll continue to account for it the same way in the fund statements that we've done previously. So, you know, the history of governmental financials is, and I don't want to get too far off on this, but 20 years ago there was a big push to make those look like corporate financial statements instead of the fund method, the method that we're all familiar with, Coca-Cola, General Electric. But somewhere along the way, there's two methods now. There's the long-term full accrual and this modified accrual. So we kind of live in both worlds. So I don't anticipate that changing anytime soon. But this one's the one that's more of the full accrual method. So sorry to get into a lot of accounting. But
So it's not like Social Security is not going to run out, right?
you know, I don't.
Any additional questions?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is obsolete items. Do I have a motion? To approve. So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions from the board? No questions from the board? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion is approved. Next on our agenda is musical instruments bid. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Any questions from the board?
We're going to put the new instruments.
Ms. Ante, where's Washington Music located?
Maryland, Virginia area.
Any additional questions? No more questions. All in favor say aye. All opposed? This motion has been approved. Next and final action item, instructional support contract. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions from the board? There are no questions from the board. All in favor say aye. All opposed? This motion has been approved. Next on our agenda is the informational report. Dr. Ron Dotson.
Thanks, Mr. Murphy. I'm gonna load the screen.
Okay, we have
Don't
the
have anything, so that would be helpful.
This is the second portion of
Yes, part two. Part two.
it.
What do?
As if the first one wasn't exciting enough. This is the second part of the presentation that I shared with you last month. I recognize again your agenda is full tonight, so I'm going to move quickly. There's a lot more detail in here that I'm going to talk about, and the detail is there because this information will be posted on the website. So if there are any follow-up questions or anything with it, speaking to the public as well as the board here, you're welcome to contact me. I'll be glad to help you with that. I do want to make sure that you, in addition to understanding, like we did last month, the test scores themselves, how we did, and how our class of 2015 graduates did, I also want to look at what's going on in terms of accountability. Whenever the state starts publishing reports of school performance, that's a very important thing. I want to make sure you understand what is going on in terms of a lot of big changes in this area. So. Normally we wouldn't talk as much about this particular part, but there's been a lot of changes going on that I felt like you needed to know about. Also want to make sure that you have an understanding of where we're going this year, what our improvement targets are for the current school year. What's changed with Alabama's accountability rules? This is kind of the big picture. We all remember the time we lived under No Child Left Behind, and technically we're still there. That is still the law of the land. There have been many efforts to pass a reform ESEA bill. That's the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. And that is, No Child Left Behind's the current incarnation of that law. And that is still technically the law. Waivers have been issued for the last few years for states because of the impasse in Congress in being unable to pass a new version of the ESEA. We were really close to getting a new version of that law this last year. Unfortunately, the grand champion for that bill was Speaker John Boehner, who is no longer in place. So the ESEA battle kind of went back to the beginning of the Monopoly game. So we're still battling for a rewrite of the ESEA. In the meantime, the state of Alabama had applied under our waiver plan in 2012 for Plan 2020. Which has been our operating strategy for the last 2 years. This past summer, you see that little caveat on the side there, revised summer 2015, the state had to apply for a renewal of that waiver. And in that renewal, there were a lot of new rules that changed what the state could and could not do. As a result, now we have two accountability systems. We have a federal accountability system, which is the ESEA AMO, and then the state system, which is the A to F school report cards. This is telling the story that I just walked through. This is the big picture of Plan 2020. And we were working in phase 1 of this plan, which would have taken our test scores and presented them in this manner. It would have given, next December, it would have published a list of schools with a school performance index out of 90 points. Schools would have gotten full points for meeting goals, partial points for improving toward meeting those goals, This was a good plan. It was a great strategy. Dr. Bice, this has been his foundation platform since becoming the state superintendent. And this has been where all of our compass headings have been pointing, is toward Plan 2020. However, now we have these changes with the ESEA waiver. The state determined this last May that to try to pursue both the federal law and the new state report card law in one plan would cause too many compromises in both of those. So as a result, we now have dual accountability frameworks, which is my phrase is version 2.0, just to distinguish between what we have. So we have this federal ESEA AMO side, and this is going to look a lot like No Child Left Behind because it has annual measurable objectives. That's what AMO means. Those goals are set for each subgroup. You don't get points. You just get a yes or a no as to whether that subgroup met that goal. All of these were created and applied retroactively this summer over the last 2 years in order to comply with the law. So we still don't know what these reports are going to look like and what they're going to say. The state's not released that yet. We're looking at it with principals, trying to anticipate what that's going to be, but at this point it is just anticipation. At the end of the day, this side of the accountability report is going to help us understand which subgroups of kids are struggling. It's not going to be very helpful in finding solutions to it. That's up to us. But it is going to hold us accountable for subgroup performance, which that's the good part of No Child Left Behind, and we like that. We're heading in the long run toward actual state report cards for each school. They'll be graded on an A to F scale. This is where all the good stuff from Plan 2020 is going to live. The bad stuff, the stuff that we have to do, is going to be on the federal side, and the good stuff is going to be in the A to F report cards. The learning gains, the college and career readiness, the local indicators, all the things that we were looking to beyond just a simple test score. What did not change, I won't get into the math here, don't worry, but what did not change is that statement at the top. Each school and system will be assigned annual improvement targets unique to their population. They increase each year so that at least half the gap between ideal and actual proficiencies that existed in 2014 will be closed by 2020. That is the mechanism by which targets are created. And in both the ESEA and the ADF report card side, we've been promised that that principle will stay the same. So that will keep us, that's the one thing that's really different from the No Child Left Behind era. Using what we thought we knew about Plan 2020 a year ago, these are the goals that we set and how we did on them. Our English goal, English language goal, we had a goal of 81.9%. We achieved 81.1%, which was an improvement over the year before, but we did not reach that goal. Math, we met and exceeded the goal dramatically. Math was our big push focus last year instructionally, and the results showed out. We had much higher than our goal in terms of reaching that improvement. Reading, again, we showed great improvement, but we didn't quite meet the goal we had set. Our goal was 57.7, we got to 57.3. So we're very happy with that improvement, but we've got new resources in place this year, new strategies that we think will have a bigger impact on reading. Graduation rate, our high schools easily met that goal, and our elementary and middle schools easily met their attendance goal. Goals and targets for this year. We have continued to use the Plan 2020 model and the strategies to guide our thinking. We believe that that's going to, as these other things continue to develop, as long as we keep setting those goals the way we have been, that we're going to be able to come out okay regardless of how the details wash out on these other things. So achievement, our kids being on track to being college and career ready, our learning gains. Talked about that last month. That's new with ACT Aspire. And as educators, we're really, really, really glad to have this new piece of data because now we can measure typical growth, how kids compare to their peers in terms of how they are growing, not just make inferences about that based on the achievement data. Graduation, of course, and we're looking at all those options now to see whether our kids are college and career ready when they leave us. And then gap closure, and I've got question marks out beside there because until we know what the state's methods are going to be there, we can't really formulate a goal for that yet. So when we get the ESEA MO reports and we know how that's going to factor into it, we can formulate more specific standards for that. In the meantime, if we have more kids making learning gains and our achievement scores are going up, we're going to be closing gaps regardless. There's lots of numbers here. Again, these will be on the website. The reason for putting all of these up here is to show that with the calculation of that unique target, not just for the district, but for each school's goal is not the same because each school is starting at a different place with different kids with different needs. So these goals are set based on the performance of the students in in the spring of 2015, and these will be their targets for. This is the achievement goal for English. So across the district, 83.6 is that, but then you have different numbers that go along with each one of these schools. We also set goals this year for learning gains because now that we have 2 years of data, we can calculate those learning gains, and we want more students to have that typical 1 year or more of growth in the area of English. Mathematics works the same way. Again, we have a district goal as well as individual goals that are based on that formula. And we have learning gains goals for math, reading, which again is that college level reading, learning gains in reading. We have achievement goals in science this year since we gave the science test for the first time this last spring. We don't have learning gains goals for science because we'll have to give the science test 2 years in a row before we can set learning gains goals. So that'll be a project for next year. Graduation, our target for this year is 95.1%. You can see the two for the two high schools. And along with that, more students demonstrating indicators of college readiness, more students hitting those indicators for career readiness as well. Gap closure, again, we can't formulate that until we know what the calculation measurement's going to be. In all of this is the vision I shared with you last year that we've been working toward in terms of improving instruction in the district, learning, teaching, inspiring, and in all those things, aiming toward making sure our students are college and career ready through rigorous, relevant relationships in all of those settings. So this has been our guiding principle. Despite all this change, this is still how we set the heading for our ship and how we set the course for where we're going. Hope that helps you. And again, if you have any questions or anything, you're welcome to contact me and I'll be glad to help you. Board members, do you have any questions? Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any new business?
Yeah.
No new business. I want to thank Councilman John Leiter for being here to hear about great things we have in the city of Hoover schools and also some challenges we face as well. I definitely want to thank John Leiter Sr., President of Jackson County Board of Education. If you stand, sir, one of our fellow board members. It's always a pleasure because we are able to talk to one another, bounce ideas off of each other as well. So thank you so much for being here.
May I add to that?
Okay.
May I add to that? Mr. Lyda was at our Veterans Day program, and by the way, we have had some fabulous Veterans Day programs. Now, in the morning, there are 5, and I have not figured out how to get to all 5, but super job on the part of our principals in planning our Veterans Day program, and so glad we were able to honor Mr. Lyda. Could we just ask that any veterans in the room stand, as Wednesday is an important day for us to acknowledge?
If John will take you out to eat at Firebirds on Wednesday, you eat free.
Thank you.
And John Lyda is just all over the place in our school district. John was with me this morning. We had an opening on our science room, lab at Gwen, and John was kind enough to be there for that. And our veterans program is just busy and all over the place. Thank you, John.
No new business. Our next scheduled board meeting is scheduled for December 14th, 2015. Now we as a board convene into executive session. It'll be about good name and character. 25 minutes as the max time. Do I have a motion for approval for executive session? Do I have a second? All in favor say aye. All opposed? Motion has been carried.